Hi everyone, welcome to Understanding the Graduate School Experience. My name is Maria Medrano. I am a senior graduate recruiter at the UTSA Graduate School, and I'm also a student in the Department of Psychology, currently pursuing a PhD. So I'm really excited to have this session with you guys, and I just want to thank you for taking the time to go over this. I think it shows how much you care about your graduate student, and I'm sure they're really grateful for you being here and taking the time to learn about how to help them. So normally we would go over introductions, but I know times are different now, so just a brief overview of what we're going to cover today. We're going to go over what to expect. So what will the first semester and last semesters of your graduate student look like? And this is pretty much generally. I know that there are many programs and programs are very diverse when it comes to the requirements. So we'll go over just some general stuff on that. We'll cover some time management and study skills because I know that primarily this is for the graduate students. But I think if you are able to get some information on these, you can be very helpful because graduate students may not remember everything that's covered during orientation. And then the last piece is just going over how to support your graduate student, how to identify some signs of stress, and help your student relieve that stress and continue on with graduate school. All right, so before we actually move on to our sections, I like to show this because I know that if a student is in graduate school, it's because they've always been hard workers. There's a reason they got into graduate school. They probably have really good grades. And so maybe getting all A's is something your graduate student is used to, but it's not something that is as important when it comes to the graduate level. Because not only are students focused on courses, but they're also focused on projects that are going to make them more marketable when they complete the program. And so sometimes getting a B is going to be fine because the student might be more focused on a project that will go on the resume. And frankly, when employees are looking at applications, there's a lot less focus on grades and a lot more focus on what the student has experienced through graduate school or what kind of projects they covered. So just remind them to let go of perfection. They don't always have to work towards A's. Okay, so when it comes to starting graduate school, we have students from many backgrounds. So it could be students coming from the workforce. So your graduate student may be transitioning from having a job, having a salary, to attending graduate school with no salary, or maybe your student is currently working and will continue working through graduate school, which is also a tough transition. And sometimes maybe your graduate student might be coming straight from a bachelor's degree to the master's. It's still an important transition, primarily because of the workload and the expectations of graduate school. So what will the semester look like? During the first year, whether your student is in a master's program, doctoral program, a certificate, most of the time is going to spend on coursework. And so for some of you, it may seem that the student has a lot more time, and that's true. They have more time to work with, but all of that extra time is meant for the student to prepare for class. Classes, and when I say more time, I mean that classes usually meet once a week for most of the programs. So then that makes you think you have all week to just manage your time as you please. Again, that is true, but a lot of that extra time is going to be spent preparing. As an undergraduate, your student more than likely absorbed information through a lecture. At the graduate level, there's a lot less of lecturing and a lot more of the student actually actively participating in a discussion. And so in order to be able to discuss, you have to know the material and think critically about it, which again takes more time. Towards the last semesters of the program, depending on what kind of program your student is in, for example, students in counseling, not only do they have to do coursework, but then hours have to be completed in order to be eligible to be licensed. So it's almost like having a second or a part-time job on top of being in grad school. If they don't have to complete hours, typically there is some sort of major project that has to be done in order to graduate. And so that's going to be taking a lot of the time in addition to coursework. So we'll cover how to manage time in the following slides, but those are just some things to expect when it comes to grad school. Another thing that happens very often when it comes to family or just loved ones or people in general, a lot of students get asked, hey, when are you going to be done with your degree? And so we call that a trigger question because it makes graduate students anxious a lot of times. And so that's one question that I think sometimes students like to avoid. So instead of focusing on, hey, when are you going to be done? I think a better approach to it would be just checking in. How are you doing? How's that paper going? If they talk to you about a paper. So I think that shows you're being supportive without triggering your graduate students. Sorry about that. All right, so time management is something that we cover with our students, but again, I think it's helpful that you are able to cover this as well with us. And so, as I mentioned earlier, your student will have a lot more reading to do, will have to learn how to think critically about material and then participate actively in discussions. And just in general, there are higher expectations at the graduate level. So there's that. There's sometimes students managing multiple roles. So maybe your graduate student is your spouse, or maybe you have children with them, or maybe you're the parents and they're helping you out at home. So it's coursework, managing all the multiple roles, and then towards the end of the program dealing with internships or research hours or other major projects that are necessary to graduate. So what can be helpful with that? I think schedules are definitely useful. And when I say schedules, I mean scheduling family time, scheduling date nights, scheduling time to de-stress and be social is useful. Managing expectations as well. So I went over what to expect for your student, but for you, expecting, knowing, and being okay with your student not being able to spend as much time with you as they used to. Sometimes students may not be able to attend family functions, so being able to know what to expect and be understanding about it will be very helpful to your graduate students. And then, of course, setting priorities are an important aspect of. I like to show students this quadrant method that I'm going to show you guys, which is very useful for identifying priorities. So what is it that has to be done? One thing when you're looking at a task to think about is it important, or is it urgent, or is it both? So for example, I'm recording this on a Friday and I have a paper due on Monday. I know that is important because that paper will get me closer to graduation. And of course it's urgent because it's due fairly soon. And so that's something that has to be done now. That's something that I should be working on now. And so that's going to be a priority. If something is important, but it's not really urgent, meaning you still have time and it's something that's going to contribute to long-term goals, but it's not necessarily something that has to be done at the moment, then that's something that's maybe not a priority, but you want to have it on your schedule. You want to have it on your calendar so that way you know to go back before it becomes a important urgent task. All right, so for things that are not important but they are urgent, maybe your student doesn't have time to do it, they go on quadrant 3. It's not something that has to be done now, again, but it's something that you can delegate to someone else. So if the oil needs to be changed in the car, maybe your student doesn't have time to do that because they have to prepare for an exam, but they can delegate that to a spouse or delegate that to a parent. And then something that's not important and not urgent, I think this is where students kind of are able to learn how to say no, because sometimes they just don't have time to do it and it's not a priority. So I think this is helpful. Again, it's been helpful for me, but your student will learn what they work best with. So they'll learn whether this quadrant method is helpful for them, or maybe they're better with keeping up with planners. Maybe they're better with electronic tools, or their phone reminding them that they have an appointment or that they have study time scheduled or something like that. So the main thing is not necessarily finding the best tool, it's finding the best tool for the student. All right, so when it comes to study habits, I just have a few tips that you can share with your student. On their section, they actually have book recommendations and very, very specific tips, but these are a little bit more general, and I think that they'll be helpful for you to remember when trying to help your student. So the first thing is approach to studying. A lot of the times, graduate students or just people in general look at studying as a task, something that has to be done, and maybe you just don't feel like doing it. Sometimes, if I have to study and I'm trying to avoid it, it's primarily because I'm looking at it as a chore. When you switch that mind frame and turn that into a learning opportunity, I think the attitude towards the task changes. And so you're more positive about it. So reminding your student that whatever it is that they're either avoiding or just kind of don't want to do at the moment is a learning opportunity that's going to help them advance in their career. So, for example, I don't like to spend a lot of time writing, but it's an opportunity for me to learn about what's in my field and write about it and actually absorb all that information in order to go on in my career and be successful. One other way in which approach can change is when you look at your student and if you hear that they have, it's called catastrophic thinking. So something like, I'm never going to finish this program, I am not smart enough to be in this program, I'm going to quit, things like that. Those are catastrophic thinking. And what you can do is you can always reframe. So I don't have time to study for this exam, I'm never going to graduate. That's really catastrophic thinking. How do you reframe that? Well, I don't have a lot of time to study, but I'm going to do as much as I can and be as prepared as I can with the time that I have. That's one way of reframing. So again, you probably know your graduate student better than I do. Clearly, I'm sure you do. So when you identify this kind of thinking, just help them reframe that. And then avoiding comparison with others. You may have heard about this already, but there is this thing called imposter syndrome, which is when students in graduate school, it's not really specific to graduate school, but when we're talking about graduate students, it's thinking that you're not good enough to be in the program, thinking that you'll never finish the program, thinking that you're not smart enough. Those are all kind of imposter syndrome manifesting, and comparison with others is not really helpful with that, because a lot of times, and I can tell you that it's happened to me, you see your classmates and you think that they are so smart, you don't belong there, and so when you start identifying that on your graduate students, I think it's important to remind them that they're in the program for a reason, that a group of experts in their field decided that they were good enough to be there, and that they chose them because they knew they're going to be successful. A committee would not choose a student that they don't think will be successful in the program. And so, again, reminding your student that they're there for a reason and to not compare themselves with other students' growth, because we're all different. All right, so kind of digress a little bit from study habits, but going back to it, location. It is important. It's not really one specific location. It's just like the way it was with time management. It's important for your student to identify where they're most effective. That could be in their bedroom. For me specifically, it's in a study room where I hear no noise at all. Some students learn better in study groups. And so just being able to help your student understand and identify when they're most effective and where they learn better. So It doesn't mean that your phone has to go away forever. All right, when it comes to notes, your student is going to get a lot more details on this, but I think the gist of it is to take notes and being able to explain material in your own words. So one activity that you can do, and this is going to cover points 4, 5, and 6, is either have your student present to you in their own words. You may not understand what they're talking about, you may not be familiar with the topic, but it helps your student learn as they're teaching you. Another thing that I personally like is flashcards. I have my husband just do flashcards with me. Again, he has no idea of what information I'm providing, but he can at least spend time with me and help me study and help me prepare for either an exam or just writing a paper. So those are some good ways in which can be effective for studying and also spending time with family. Okay, and so I went over realistic scheduling, so I'm going to skip over to breaks and rewards because they are important, which is the main reason that procrastinating doesn't really work. Because when a student procrastinates and just leaves everything till the end, there is no time to take a break. It's just a constant trying to absorb as much information as possible. And so this is a good time for you to check in with your student. If you know that they have a paper coming up or an exam coming up, it's a good thing. It's a good thing to say, hey, I know you have a paper coming up, so you might want to get started on that. Of course, without being intrusive, but I think you're going to be really helpful and really, if you show that support and understanding and knowing that they do have to spend time on projects in order to not be stressed out at the end, without having the ability to take breaks from it. And then of course we're going to cover health and balance next. Before we do that though, another small tip is to remind your student that graduate school is temporary. Again, sometimes, and I do this so often, your student might say, I hate this, I don't like it, it's so stressful. Those are just words. Of course, you know that they're there for a reason. You know that they're passionate about the topic that they're studying. But yes, graduate school can be stressful. It's just important to remember that that stress is temporary, that this is just one stepping stone toward the next career goal. So next, I'm going to go over some stuff that you as a person who is close to your graduate student can look out for, because a lot of times it's hard for us to listen to our own bodies. Some things that you can look out for when it comes to stress are disruption in sleep. So it could be either your student is not sleeping well or sleeping too much, maybe some signs of anxiety or depression, so losing interest in something that they used to enjoy, or anxiety over turning in a paper, anxiety over a test, overeating, undereating. A lot of times anxiety manifests as irritability and aggression, so those are also some things to look out for. And then just remembering that these are just a few things that you can look out for. Everybody responds to stress differently. And then one last thing before I move on to the next slide is remembering that not all stress is bad. So sometimes being a little, and I don't want to call it a little anxious, but I'm gonna go ahead and call it that anyway. A little anxious about an upcoming exam can be helpful, can help the student focus. So being able to identify that. And then if so, just sending your student to resources that are available to them. We have counseling services. We have career services as well. So if your student is towards the end of their graduate program and they're stressing out about what are they going to do afterwards, they have counselors there as well that can help specifically with career. So just reminding your students that there are plenty of resources that they can use at UTSA. So some things that can cause stress are major life changes, changes in environment, changes in workload, and those are all external. And honestly, going to graduate school is going to have a lot of those aspects. So starting a graduate program is a major life change. It is a change in environment. The workload is going to change, especially for those of you who have students who are going to be working and going to graduate school. That is something that's going to require a lot of time management, which, if there are poor time management skills, can result in very high stress. If your student's not coming from the workforce, but they're coming from a bachelor's program, that's still a big difference in workload because there are different expectations at the graduate level. And then, as I mentioned before, um, preparing for a course and the expectations there are going to be a lot higher. Some internal triggers are fear. So I think the most common one for graduate students is going to be fear of failure. And so those are just some things that can cause some stress with your graduate students. So if you want to be helpful with them, I think it's useful to go over what they can and can't change. So the student can't really change when the exam is due, but they do have control over what they do with the time in between now and that exam, which is where time management comes in. So I think another thing that is important for you as family members is reminding the student that it's okay to take a break from school. Because again, it can be stressful. So it's fine to do something your graduate student enjoys as a form of self-care. Um, you'll see a few behaviors or activities that can be helpful. But again, you know your graduate student best. So invite them to do something that they're interested in, something they enjoy, to take a small break from studying or from just being a graduate student. Another important reminder for your graduate students is that taking a break is not going to put them behind. Taking one day off of school to be with family, to use family as a social outlet, friends who are not in the program as a social outlet, is not going to put them behind. That is just something useful to avoid burning out, pretty much. Some final thoughts on this. I used to do this presentation with an old coworker, and we were both in graduate school. So what we used to tell our families was that when the student goes to graduate school, the entire family goes to graduate school. So yes, it is a life-changing experience and decision, but doesn't only affect the graduate student, it affects the loved ones. So it's important to have open conversations about what to expect, how time will be a little bit more restricted, family time, or just spending time with loved ones. Another open conversation that I think is essential for success in graduate school is talking to advisors and professors. And so, if you know your graduate student is going through something that either is life changing or it's preventing them from doing well in school, it's important to encourage them to have those conversations, because, as one of my professors told me once, if your professor or your advisor doesn't know that something is wrong, they're not able to help you. So encouraging your students to do that, I think will help not only them, but the advisor be more flexible. One example that I can think of is I've always worked through graduate school, and my job involves a lot of traveling. So I knew that I was going to have to miss class. So on the first day of class, I would always wait until the end of class and talk to my professor and let them know, hey, I'm working full time while attending graduate school. I'm going to travel a lot, so I may have to miss some classes. And most of the time, they are very flexible and they're able to work around exams. So it definitely is useful to have those open conversations. Checking in with your graduate student is also helpful, because you don't want them stressing out without you being able to identify those behaviors and help them out. So just checking in, letting them know you're there, that you are there to support them while this temporary phase happens. And then, of course, being a social outlet. And that goes back to those self-care activities that I went over before. just being able to identify when it's necessary, when self-care is necessary, and when you know that it will be beneficial for them to spend time with loved ones, to kind of avoid burning out. So normally this is where we would have a discussion, and go over some questions you may have, but again, things are different now, so feel free to email me if you have any questions. If you want to know more about the resources available to your graduate student, you can email me at Maria, Maria dot Medrano, Medrano at utsa.edu. Refer your graduate students to me. I will be able to refer them to the correct resources to be able to make sure that this is a successful transition and that they have a good academic journey here at UTSA. Lastly, I just want to thank you again for taking the time to be in this presentation. Thank you for caring so much about your graduate student, that you're here to learn about their experience and how you can help them out. And hopefully we'll see you around. Thank you.